At my wedding, my mother-in-law stood up during the reception and announced to everyone that I had trapped her son with a pregnancy. The room went silent. 200 guests stared at me, waiting for my reaction. But what she didn't know was that I had been recording every conversation with her for months, and what I captured would destroy her reputation forever. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Allison Parker, and I thought I was marrying the man of my dreams. Marcus Rivera seemed perfect when we met at the downtown Phoenix law firm where I worked as a paralegal. He was charming, successful, and treated me like I was the center of his universe. What I didn't realize was that his mother, Patricia Rivera, had already decided I wasn't good enough for her precious son. The signs were subtle at first. When Marcus brought me home for Sunday dinner 6 months into our relationship, Patricia would make comments that seemed innocent on the surface but carried a sharp edge underneath. She'd say things like, "Oh, Allison works in the legal field. Too? How nice that you found someone who can keep up." Or my personal favorite, "I hope you're not one of those career women who thinks work comes before family." I grew up in a middle-class household in Tempe. My father, Robert, was an electrician, and my mother, Linda, managed a small accounting office. They taught me the value of hard work and independence. Patricia, on the other hand, came from old money in Scottsdale. Her late husband had left her a substantial inheritance, and she wore her wealth like armor, using it to judge everyone around her. When Marcus proposed after 18 months of dating, I was over the moon. We decided on a spring wedding at the Desert Botanical Garden, a venue I had dreamed about since I was a little girl. The planning process should have been magical, but Patricia made it a nightmare from the very beginning. She questioned every decision I made. The flowers weren't elegant enough. The caterer wasn't upscale enough. My dress, which I had saved for months to buy, was too simple for someone marrying into the Rivera family. But Marcus always sided with his mother, saying she just wanted everything to be perfect because she loved us both. The real trouble started when I found out I was pregnant 3 months before the wedding. Marcus and I had been trying for a baby, and we were thrilled. We decided to wait until after the ceremony to announce it to the family, wanting to keep the focus on our wedding day. But somehow, Patricia found out. I still don't know how she discovered the pregnancy. Maybe she went through my purse when I left it in their living room during one of our visits. Maybe she overheard a phone conversation I had with my doctor's office. All I know is that her behavior toward me changed dramatically overnight. The passive-aggressive comments became outright hostile. She started calling me at work, questioning whether I was really ready for marriage and motherhood. She'd make remarks about how some women use pregnancy to secure their position in a family. When I tried to talk to Marcus about his mother's behavior, he brushed it off as wedding stress. 2 weeks before the wedding, Patricia invited me to lunch at her country club. I thought maybe she wanted to make peace, to start fresh before becoming my mother-in-law officially. I was wrong. We sat on the terrace overlooking the golf course, and she ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted. Then she looked me straight in the eye and said, "I know about the baby, Allison, and I know what you're trying to do." My heart stopped. I asked her what she meant, and she leaned forward with this cold smile I'll never forget. "You got pregnant on purpose to trap my son into marriage. Girls like you always do. You see a successful man from a good family, and you think a baby is your meal ticket." I was stunned. I tried to explain that the pregnancy was planned, that Marcus and I had discussed starting a family, but she held up her hand to silence me. "I've seen this story before, dear. The small-town girl who thinks she's hit the jackpot. But let me tell you something about the Rivera family. We don't accept charity cases, and we certainly don't accept manipulation." I wanted to get up and leave, but something kept me in that chair. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the need to understand just how deep her hatred ran. She continued talking, her voice never rising above a conversational tone. making her words even more chilling. Marcus is too kind-hearted to see what you're really doing. He thinks he loves you, but what he really loves is the idea of being needed. You've made yourself into his little project, the girl from the wrong side of town who needs rescuing. She sipped her iced tea and looked out at the perfectly manicured golf course. I've decided not to attend the wedding. I can't in good conscience watch my son make the biggest mistake of his life. But don't worry, dear. This marriage won't last. Once the baby comes and reality sets in, Marcus will see you for what you really are. I finally found my voice and told her she was wrong about everything. I loved Marcus, and he loved me. The baby was wanted and planned. But she just laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. Keep telling yourself that, sweetheart. But we both know the truth. I drove home in tears, but when I tried to tell Marcus what his mother had said, he didn't believe me. He said I must have misunderstood, that his mother was just concerned about us rushing into parenthood. When I insisted that Patricia had been cruel and accusatory, he got defensive. She raised me by herself after my father died. She's protective, that's all. Maybe you're being a little sensitive because of the pregnancy hormones. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I went online and ordered a small recording device, the kind private investigators use. If Patricia was going to continue attacking me, I wanted proof. Marcus might not believe me, but he couldn't argue with her own words. The device arrived 3 days later, small enough to hide in a pocket or purse. I started carrying it everywhere, turning it on whenever I was around Patricia or talking to her on the phone. I told myself I was protecting my marriage and my unborn child. I had no idea I was actually gathering evidence for something much bigger. The first conversation I recorded was a phone call she made to me the day before the wedding. She called to tell me she had changed her mind and would be attending after all. But her tone made it clear this wasn't a peace offering. I realized I need to be there for Marcus when this whole charade falls apart. Someone needs to be his voice of reason when you show your true colors. I asked her what she meant, and she laughed that awful laugh again. Oh, darling, you'll see. Tomorrow is going to be very interesting. I think it's time everyone knew exactly what kind of woman Marcus is really marrying. The line went dead, and I sat there staring at my phone, my hands shaking. I had a terrible feeling that Patricia was planning something for the wedding, something designed to humiliate me in front of our family and friends. But I had no idea just how far she was willing to go. That night, Marcus found me sitting on our bed, still in my wedding dress from the final fitting. I was crying, not from joy like a bride should be, but from dread. When he asked what was wrong, I tried one more time to make him understand. Your mother hates me, Marcus. She's planning something for tomorrow. I can feel it. He sat beside me and took my hands. Allison, you're being paranoid. Mom can be difficult, but she wants me to be happy. Once you two spend more time together, you'll see she's not as bad as you think. I wanted to tell him about the recording device, about the conversation we just had, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, like I was an hysterical pregnant woman who couldn't be trusted to understand his family dynamics. Or maybe I knew, deep down, that I needed more than one conversation to make him see the truth. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, perfect Arizona weather for an outdoor ceremony. I woke up with a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with morning sickness. As I got ready with my bridesmaids, I kept the recording device in my makeup bag, easily accessible but hidden from view. My maid of honor, Jessica Chen, noticed how tense I was. She'd been my best friend since college and knew all about my complicated relationship with Patricia. Just focus on Marcus today, she said as she helped me into my dress. This is your day, not hers. Don't let her steal your joy. But as we drove to the venue, I couldn't shake the feeling that Patricia had already stolen something from me. My wedding day should have been about love and new beginnings, not about bracing myself for whatever attack she had planned. the ceremony itself was beautiful. Marcus waited for me at the altar with tears in his eyes, and for a moment, I forgot about everything else. This was the man I loved, the father of my child, my partner for life. Whatever his mother thought or did couldn't change that. We exchanged vows under the desert sky, surrounded by towering saguaro cacti and the people who loved us. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe I had been wrong about Patricia. Maybe she would keep whatever poison she was planning to herself. The reception was held in the garden's pavilion, decorated with white roses and twinkling lights. The first hour went smoothly. We had our first dance, cut the cake, and mingled with our guests. Patricia was there, dressed in an expensive black dress that seemed more appropriate for a funeral than a wedding, but she was behaving herself. I started to relax, thinking maybe I had overreacted. Maybe the stress of wedding planning and early pregnancy had made me imagine threats that didn't exist. But then came the moment when, traditionally, the families give toasts to the happy couple. My father spoke first, his voice thick with emotion as he welcomed Marcus into our family and wished us a lifetime of happiness. Marcus's best friend, David Walsh, gave a funny speech about how Marcus had been transformed by love. Even my normally reserved mother stood up to say a few words about how proud she was of the woman I had become. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. Then Patricia rose from her seat at the head table. The room quieted as everyone turned their attention to the elegant woman in black. She had that same cold smile I remembered from the country club, and my blood turned to ice. She raised her champagne glass and began to speak in a voice that carried clearly across the silent pavilion. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate what I'm sure will be a very interesting marriage. A few people laughed nervously, thinking she was making a joke about the normal challenges of married life. But I could see in her eyes that this was no joke. My son Marcus has always been too trusting, too willing to see the best in people. It's a wonderful quality, but it can also make him vulnerable to those who would take advantage of his generous nature. The laughter died completely. Guests were looking at each other with confused expressions, not sure where this speech was heading. Marcus was staring at his mother with a puzzled frown, clearly as surprised as everyone else. Some women, Patricia continued, her voice getting stronger, are very clever about getting what they want. They know exactly how to make a man feel needed, how to create a situation where he feels obligated to do the right thing. My hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles were white. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes beginning to turn toward me as Patricia's meaning became clear. The truth is, my new daughter-in-law trapped my son with a pregnancy. She got herself pregnant on purpose to force him into this marriage. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, could feel the heat of embarrassment and rage flooding my face. Marcus looked like he'd been slapped, his mouth hanging open as he stared at his mother in shock. But Patricia wasn't finished. She turned to look directly at me, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. I just thought everyone should know what kind of celebration this really is. Not a love story, but a trap. Not a choice, but an obligation. She raised her glass higher. So here's to Allison, for getting exactly what she wanted, and to Marcus, for being too good a man to abandon his responsibilities, even when they come wrapped in deception. The room exploded into chaos. Some people gasped, others started talking all at once. A few guests got up and headed for the exit, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding before them. My mother looked like she might faint, and my father was already standing up, his face red with anger. But I didn't move. I just sat there, feeling like I was watching this happen to someone else. This was my wedding day, the day I had dreamed about since I was a little girl, and it was being destroyed by a woman who hated me for reasons I still didn't fully understand. Marcus finally found his voice. "Mom, what are you doing? Why would you say something like that?" Patricia looked at him with what might have been pity. "Someone had to tell the truth, sweetheart. Someone had to make sure you went into this marriage with your eyes open." That's when I remembered the recording device in my purse. My fingers found it, still running, still capturing every word of this nightmare. But more importantly, I remembered all the other conversations I had recorded over the past 2 weeks. All of Patricia's cruel words, her admissions of hatred, her plans to humiliate me. I stood up slowly, my legs shaky, but my resolve growing stronger with each heartbeat. The room fell silent again as everyone waited to see how the accused bride would respond to such a public attack. But I didn't respond to Patricia's accusation. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, connecting it to the venue's sound system through the DJ's equipment. The same speakers that had played our wedding song were about to play something very different. Patricia's eyes widened as she realized what I was doing, but it was too late to stop me. "Since we're sharing truths tonight," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I think everyone should hear what Patricia really thinks about this family." The first recording that played through the speakers was from a week earlier. Patricia's voice filled the pavilion, crystal clear and unmistakably venomous. "That girl is nothing but a gold digger, Margaret. She saw my son's success and decided to secure her future the oldest way possible. A pregnancy is such a convenient accident, don't you think?" The voice of Patricia's friend Margaret could be heard responding, "Are you sure, Patricia? Marcus seems genuinely happy." "Happy? He's obligated." "There's a difference. That little manipulator knew exactly what she was doing when she stopped taking her birth control." Gasps echoed through the crowd. Several of Marcus's business colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I watched Patricia's face drain of color as she realized the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just one conversation. I had been recording for weeks. The next clip played automatically. This one was from our final dress fitting, when Patricia had insisted on coming along. She thought we were alone in the dressing room while I tried on alterations. "You know, Allison, I've been thinking about our little chat at the country club. I want you to understand that this isn't personal. It's just that the Rivera family has certain standards, and frankly, you don't meet them." My own voice could be heard responding, "What exactly do you mean by standards, Patricia?" "Well, for starters, your family's financial situation. Marcus will be supporting not just you and this baby, but probably your parents too when they get older. Your father's trade work doesn't exactly come with a retirement plan, does it?" The recording continued with Patricia detailing how she had investigated my family's background, including running credit checks on my parents without their knowledge. She had even contacted my previous employers to ask about my character and reliability. Marcus stood up abruptly from the head table, his chair scraping against the floor. "Mom, please tell me this isn't real. Please tell me you didn't actually say these things." But Patricia was beyond denying. Her mask had completely slipped, and the rage underneath was visible to everyone. "Stop this right now, Allison. You have no right to record private conversations." "Private conversations?" I asked, still holding my phone connected to the sound system. "You mean like the one where you told your bridge club that I was probably lying about who the father of my baby was?" I played that recording next. Patricia's laugh was even more chilling when amplified through speakers, especially when she suggested that I might have been seeing other men to cover up the timeline of my pregnancy. My mother finally found her voice and stood up from our family table. "How dare you?" she said, her words carrying across the shocked silence. "How dare you spread lies about my daughter?" Patricia turned her fury on my mother. "Your daughter is a liar and a schemer, Linda. She's trapped my son into a marriage he doesn't want with a baby that's probably not even his." That was the moment Marcus finally snapped. "Enough!" His voice boomed across the pavilion. "Mom, what is wrong with you? How could you say these things about the woman I love?" But I wasn't finished. I had saved the worst recording for last, the conversation Patricia had with Marcus's deceased father's brother, Uncle Raymond, who lived in Colorado. She had called him the day before the wedding, not knowing I was in the house. "Raymond, I need you to understand what's happening to Marcus. This Parker girl has him completely fooled. She got herself pregnant deliberately, and now she's going to bleed our family dry." Uncle Raymond's voice crackled through the phone on the recording. "Patricia, are you sure about this? That's a serious accusation." "I'm absolutely certain. I've seen women like her before. They target successful men and use pregnancy as a weapon. Marcus is too kind-hearted to see it, but I won't let her destroy everything we've built." The recording captured Patricia detailing her plan to expose me at the wedding, to make sure everyone knew what kind of person she believed I was. She even discussed how she hoped the public humiliation would make Marcus reconsider the marriage entirely. If I can plant enough doubt in his mind, maybe he'll come to his senses. Better a broken engagement than a lifetime of being used. Pavilion was now filled with angry murmurs. Several of Marcus's relatives were shaking their heads in disgust. His cousin Maria, who had flown in from California, stood up and walked out in protest. Even some of Patricia's own friends from her social circle looked horrified by what they were hearing. Marcus was staring at his mother like he'd never seen her before. "You were planning to humiliate my wife at our wedding. You called my uncle to spread lies about her. You investigated her family behind our backs." Patricia straightened her spine, trying to regain some composure. "Everything I did was to protect you, Marcus. Someone had to look out for your best interests since you clearly weren't thinking straight." "My best interests?" Marcus's voice was shaking with rage. "You violated every boundary, invaded our privacy, and tried to destroy the woman I love on our wedding day. And you think that was protecting me?" I finally turned off the recordings and addressed the room directly. "I'm sorry everyone had to hear this on what should have been a celebration, but I couldn't let Patricia's lies stand unchallenged. Everything you heard is true. These are her own words, recorded over the past 2 weeks." My father approached the head table, his face set in stone. He'd never been a man of many words, but when he spoke, people listened. "Mrs. Rivera, I've worked hard my whole life to provide for my family. I may not have your money, but I raised my daughter to be honest and kind. The fact that you would attack her character and our family's dignity tells me everything I need to know about yours." Patricia's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. "You people don't understand. The Rivera name means something in this community. We can't have it associated with what?" Jessica, my maid of honor, stood up from the bridal party table. "With love? With happiness? With a woman who's good enough to earn Marcus's love without scheming for it?" The confrontation was spiraling out of control. Several guests were gathering their belongings to leave, clearly uncomfortable. With the family drama unfolding before them, others seemed frozen in place, unsure whether to intervene or simply bear witness to the destruction of what was supposed to be a joyful celebration. Marcus walked around the table to stand beside me, taking my hand in his. For the first time, since the toast began, I felt like I wasn't facing this alone. "Mom, you need to leave," he said quietly, but his words carried clearly in the still air. "You've done enough damage for one night." Patricia looked genuinely shocked that her son was choosing me over her. "Marcus, don't let her turn you against your own family. She's manipulating you just like I warned you she would." "The only manipulation I've heard tonight came from you," Marcus replied. "Allison never said a bad word about you, even when you were treating her terribly. She tried to make this work, tried to build a relationship with you, and this is how you repaid her kindness." "Uncle Raymond, who had driven down from Colorado for the wedding, approached our table. He was a quiet man in his 70s, someone I'd only met briefly during the engagement period. He looked directly at Patricia with disappointment written across his weathered face. "Patricia, your husband would be ashamed of what you've done tonight. Michael loved Marcus, but he also taught him to judge people by their character, not their bank account. This young woman has shown more grace under attack than you've shown in years of being supposedly protective." That seemed to break something inside Patricia. She grabbed her purse from the table and stood up, her black dress making her look like a specter at our celebration. Fine. Choose her over your own mother. But don't come crying to me when she shows her true colors. Don't expect me to pick up the pieces when this marriage falls apart and she takes half of everything you've worked for. She started toward the exit, but turned back one more time. "And don't expect me to play grandmother to a baby that was conceived. To trap you." The cruelty of that final statement hung in the air like poison. My hand instinctively moved to my still flat stomach, protecting the child growing inside me from words that could wound even in the womb. Marcus stepped forward, his voice deadly quiet. "If you ever speak about my wife or my child that way again, you'll never see either of us again. Do you understand me?" Patricia's face went white, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. "We'll see how long your loyalty lasts when reality sets in." She walked out of the pavilion, her heels clicking sharply against the stone floor. A few of her closest friends followed her, but notably, most of Marcus's extended family remained in their seats, looking embarrassed and apologetic. The DJ, clearly unsure how to handle the situation, started playing soft background music again. Conversations gradually resumed around the room, though the atmosphere was forever changed. What should have been a night of celebration had become a night of revelation and reckoning. Marcus pulled me aside to a quiet corner of the pavilion, away from the remaining guests. "Allison, I am so sorry. I had no idea she was capable of something like this." I could see the genuine shock and pain in his eyes. This wasn't just an attack on me, it was a betrayal of him as well. "You couldn't have known. She hid it well. But you tried to tell me. You tried to warn me about her behavior, and I dismissed your concerns. I told you that you were being sensitive, that it was just pregnancy hormones. I should have listened." We stood there holding each other while our wedding reception continued around us in a subdued, awkward fashion. Some guests approached us with words of support and encouragement. Marcus's cousin David pulled him aside to apologize for his aunt's behavior and assure him that the rest of the family didn't share her views. My parents came over to check on us, my mother's eyes red from crying. "Sweetheart, are you okay? Do you want to leave?" I looked around at the people who had stayed, at the friends and family members who had witnessed Patricia's cruelty and chose to remain by our side. These were the people who mattered, the ones who would support our marriage through whatever challenges lay ahead. "No, Mom, this is our wedding day. We're not letting her steal it from us completely." Marcus squeezed my hand. "Are you sure? We can end this now if you want." "I'm sure. But first, I need to tell you something. The recordings weren't the only evidence I gathered." His eyebrows raised in surprise. "What do you mean?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope I'd been carrying all day. "Patricia wasn't just talking about us. She's been spreading rumors about other family members, too. I recorded those conversations as well, and I think some of your relatives deserve to know what she's been saying behind their backs." The envelope contained transcripts of additional recordings where Patricia had made disparaging comments about Marcus's cousin who was going through a divorce, his brother who had struggled with alcoholism years earlier, and even Uncle Raymond's financial situation after his wife's medical bills. Marcus stared at the envelope like it contained a bomb. "She talked about all of them?" "She's been poisoning family relationships for years, Marcus. Playing people against each other, spreading gossip, creating drama. We weren't her first victims, and we wouldn't have been her last." As the reception wound down and guests began to leave, Several family members approached us with their own stories about Patricia's behavior over the years. Apparently, her cruelty toward me wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a long pattern of manipulation and control that had affected the entire family. Marcus's brother Tony, who lived in Tucson, pulled us aside before leaving. "I should have said something years ago. Mom has been doing this to anyone who gets close to the family. She drove away my first girlfriend with similar tactics. I was just too afraid to stand up to her." By the end of the night, it became clear that Patricia's attack on me had actually exposed something much larger, a web of family dysfunction that had been hidden beneath a veneer of respectability for years. Her attempt to destroy my reputation had instead destroyed her own, and revealed her true character to everyone who mattered. As Marcus and I drove away from our wedding reception, heading to our hotel for what should have been a romantic wedding night, we were both emotionally exhausted but oddly relieved. The truth was finally out in the open. "What happens now?" I asked as we sat in our hotel room, still in our wedding clothes. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the Phoenix skyline. "Now we build our own family," he finally said. "Without her toxicity, without her manipulation, just us and our baby." I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Patricia wasn't the type of person to accept defeat gracefully. But for the first time since I'd met her, I felt like Marcus and I were truly on the same side, facing whatever came next as a united front. What I didn't know was that Patricia's humiliation at the wedding was just the beginning. Her next moves would be far more calculated and dangerous than anything I had experienced so far. We never made it to our honeymoon in Maui. 3 days after the wedding, while we were supposed to be lying on beaches and forgetting about the world, Marcus got a call from his law firm that changed everything. "Mr. Rivera, I'm calling about the complaint filed against you with the State Bar Association. You need to come in immediately." Marcus looked at me across our hotel breakfast table, confusion written all over his face. "What complaint? I haven't done anything wrong." The voice on the other end was apologetic but firm. "Sir, the allegations are quite serious. Professional misconduct, conflict of interest, misuse of client funds. You really need to speak with our senior partners today." My blood turned cold. Patricia's revenge had begun, but not against me directly. She was going after Marcus's career, the thing he valued most after our relationship. She knew that destroying his livelihood would destroy our future together. We packed our bags and flew back to Phoenix that afternoon. Marcus was quiet during the entire flight, staring out the window with a worried expression I'd never seen before. When we landed, he went straight to his office while I went home to our apartment, feeling helpless and afraid. He called me 3 hours later, his voice hollow. "Allison, someone filed a formal complaint claiming I embezzled money from client accounts to pay for our wedding. They have bank records, transaction details, everything." "That's impossible. You used your savings for the wedding. I saw the statements." "I know that, and you know that. But someone has created very convincing evidence to the contrary. They're suspending me pending a full investigation." I sank into our kitchen chair, my hand instinctively moving to my stomach. "Marcus, who would have access to create something like that?" There was a long pause. "Someone with money and connections, someone who understands the legal system well enough to know exactly how to make false accusations look credible." We both knew who he was talking about, but neither of us wanted to say her name out loud. Patricia had spent years moving in the highest social circles of Phoenix. She had friends in law firms, accounting offices, and government agencies. If anyone could orchestrate this kind of elaborate frame-up, it was her. That evening, Marcus came home looking defeated. The firm had placed him on immediate unpaid leave while the Bar Association conducted their investigation. Even if he was eventually cleared, the damage to his reputation could be permanent. "There's more," he said, slumping into our living room chair. "Someone also filed a complaint with Child Protective Services. My heart stopped. What kind of complaint? They're claiming that you're an unfit mother-to-be, that you have a history of drug use, unstable employment, and mental health issues. They want to investigate whether our baby will be safe in our home. I couldn't breathe. Patricia wasn't just trying to destroy our marriage or Marcus's career. She was trying to take our unborn child away from us before it was even born. How is that even possible? I've never used drugs in my life. My employment record is spotless. Marcus pulled out a folder thick with official-looking documents. Someone provided them with medical records, showing multiple prescriptions for anxiety medication, employment records showing you were fired from 3 previous jobs for erratic behavior, and witness statements from people claiming they've seen you drinking during the pregnancy. I grabbed the papers with shaking hands. The medical records had my name and social security number, but I'd never seen these doctors or filled these prescriptions. The employment records were for jobs I'd never held at companies I'd never heard of. The witness statements were signed by people whose names I didn't recognize. This is all fake, I whispered. Every single document is fabricated. I know that. But proving it's fake is going to take time and money we don't have. And in the meantime, CPS has the right to monitor our pregnancy and potentially remove the baby at birth if they determine we're unfit parents. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling like we were trapped in a nightmare with no way out. Patricia had found the perfect way to hurt us. She was using the legal system itself as a weapon, hiding behind official procedures and bureaucratic processes that were designed to protect children and maintain professional standards. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day researching everything I could about false accusations and legal harassment. What I found made me realize we were dealing with something much more sophisticated than simple family drama. Creating convincing fake medical records required access to healthcare databases and official forms. Fabricating employment records meant having connections with HR departments and payroll systems. Filing believable complaints with multiple agencies required someone who understood exactly how those systems worked and what kind of evidence they would find credible. This wasn't the work of an angry mother-in-law acting alone. This was a coordinated attack involving multiple people with specialized skills and inside knowledge. I decided to call Detective Sarah Martinez, a woman I'd met during my paralegal work who specialized in fraud investigations. When I explained our situation, she agreed to meet with me unofficially. "What you're describing sounds like identity fraud and harassment," she said as we sat in a coffee shop downtown. "But proving it won't be easy. Whoever is doing this knows how to cover their tracks." I showed her the fake documents, and she examined them carefully. These are very good forgeries. The paper quality, the formatting, even the official seals look authentic. This would have cost thousands of dollars to produce. So what do? You fight back, but you do it smart. Start documenting everything. Every phone call, every piece of mail, every official notice you receive. Build your own paper trail proving where you were and what you were doing when these alleged incidents supposedly occurred. I spent the next week gathering evidence of my real life. Bank records showing I'd never purchased drugs or alcohol during my pregnancy. Security footage from my workplace proving I was at my job when I was supposedly being fired from other jobs. Medical records from my actual doctor confirming my pregnancy was progressing normally and I was healthy. Meanwhile, Marcus was dealing with his own investigation. The Bar Association had frozen his access to client accounts and was conducting interviews with everyone who had worked with him over the past 2 years. His reputation in the legal community was being destroyed by whispered rumors and speculation. One evening, as we sat at our kitchen table surrounded by paperwork and legal documents, Marcus looked at me with exhaustion written all over his face. "Maybe we should just leave Phoenix, start over somewhere else where no one knows us." "Running away won't stop this," I replied. "She'll just follow us with more accusations and more harassment. We have to prove she's behind it. But how? have no direct evidence linking her to any of this. That's when I remembered something from the wedding recordings. Patricia had mentioned names, friends who had helped her research my background, people who owed her favors, connections she could use to protect Marcus from me. I went back through all my recordings and transcripts, this time looking not just for what Patricia had said about me, but for clues about who she was working with. In one conversation, she mentioned calling in a favor from Richard at the medical board. In another, she talked about having lunch with Jennifer from the DA's office to discuss family protection services. These weren't idle threats or empty boasts. These were specific names of real people in positions to help her fabricate evidence and file false accusations. I brought this information to Detective Martinez, who agreed to look into these connections. What she found was shocking. Patricia had been cultivating relationships with people in key positions throughout the Phoenix legal and medical community for years. She served on charity boards with judges' wives, played tennis with prosecutors, and had donated significant money to various professional organizations. She's built herself a network, Detective Martinez explained. People who owe her favors or see her as a valuable ally. When she calls in those favors, they don't ask too many questions. But networks work both ways. While Patricia had allies, she also had enemies. People she had crossed or manipulated over the years who were tired of her interference and abuse of power. Detective Martinez introduced me to Dr. Amanda Foster, a physician who had been pressured by Patricia to provide false medical information about another family member years earlier. Dr. Foster had refused and had been targeted with harassment as a result. She tried to ruin my practice when I wouldn't cooperate with her schemes, Dr. Foster told us. I've been waiting for someone brave enough to stand up to her. Dr. Foster agreed to help us prove the medical records were forged. She had connections within the healthcare system and could trace the fake documents back to their source. What she discovered was a network of corrupt clerks and administrators who were selling access to official forms and databases. Within a week, we had identified 3 people who had been paid to create false records under my name. When confronted with evidence of their crimes, 2 of them agreed to cooperate with the police in exchange for reduced charges. The investigation expanded rapidly. The fake employment records were traced to a private investigation firm that Patricia had hired to research my background. When they couldn't find any real dirt, they had simply created it. The CPS complaint was more complex. It had been filed by someone using a false name and address, but security cameras at the government building showed Patricia entering and leaving around the time the complaint was submitted. Marcus's Bar Association complaint was the most sophisticated part of the scheme. It involved actual bank records that had been altered to make legitimate transactions look suspicious. The person responsible was an accountant who had been Patricia's financial advisor for years. As evidence mounted against Patricia and her co-conspirators, I felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that we could finally prove our innocence, and anger that one person's hatred had caused so much damage to so many lives. The Bar Association quietly dropped their investigation against Marcus when presented with evidence of the fraudulent documents. CPS closed their case and apologized for the intrusion. Marcus was reinstated at his law firm, though the experience had left him shaken and distrustful. But Patricia wasn't finished with us. As news of the investigation began to spread through her social circle, she realized her carefully constructed network was crumbling. People who had helped her were facing criminal charges. Friends who had supported her were distancing themselves to protect their own reputations. That's when she made the mistake that would finally bring her down completely. Instead of retreating and accepting defeat, she doubled down on her attacks. And this time, she targeted not just Marcus and me, but our unborn child, directly. I was 6 months pregnant when I received a package at work with no return address. Inside was a baby blanket, soft and white, with a note pinned to it. Some babies are better off never being born, especially ones conceived in lies. The package also contained what appeared to be medical documents suggesting that my baby had severe genetic defects, and that I should consider termination. The documents looked official, complete with letterhead from a Phoenix medical center and a doctor's signature. I called my real obstetrician immediately, who confirmed that these documents were completely false. My baby was healthy and developing normally. But someone had gone to enormous effort to create fake medical reports designed to terrify me into ending my pregnancy. This crossed a line that even Patricia's previous attacks hadn't approached. She wasn't just trying to destroy my marriage or Marcus's career anymore. She was trying to manipulate me into ending my pregnancy through fear and false information. I took the package directly to Detective Martinez, who recognized this as a new level of criminal behavior. Sending false medical information to a pregnant woman with the intent of causing emotional distress and potentially influencing her medical decisions was a serious felony. The investigation into this package led to the discovery of Patricia's most shocking crime yet. She had been impersonating medical professionals, creating fake test results, and even attempting to contact my doctor's office to request unnecessary and potentially dangerous procedures. Phone records showed she had called my obstetrician's office multiple times, claiming to be a specialist who needed to discuss urgent concerns about my pregnancy. She had tried to convince them to schedule additional tests and procedures that weren't medically necessary, apparently hoping to create complications or anxiety. When confronted with this evidence, my doctor was horrified. She could have caused real harm to you and your baby if we had followed any of her suggestions. Some of the procedures she was recommending are contraindicated for pregnant women. This revelation changed everything. Patricia wasn't just a vindictive mother-in-law anymore. She was a dangerous criminal who had put both me and my unborn child at risk for the sake of her vendetta. The police finally had enough evidence to arrest her. But Patricia Rivera was nothing if not resourceful, and she had one final surprise waiting for all of us. Patricia Rivera was arrested on a Tuesday morning at her Scottsdale Country Club while having breakfast with 3 of her closest friends. Detective Martinez had timed it perfectly. She wanted Patricia's social circle to witness her downfall firsthand. I wasn't there to see it happen, but Jessica, who worked at a marketing firm that handled events for the club, called me immediately. "Allison, you're not going to believe this. They just arrested Patricia in the main dining room. Half of Scottsdale society was watching. The charges were extensive: identity fraud, filing false reports, harassment, impersonation of medical professionals, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The bail was set at $200,000, an amount that should have been easy for someone with Patricia's wealth to post. But when her lawyer arrived at the courthouse that afternoon, he discovered something shocking. Patricia's accounts had been frozen by the IRS. An anonymous tip had led to an investigation into her finances, revealing years of tax evasion and money laundering through her various charity organizations. Marcus got the call about his mother's arrest while we were at my 30-week prenatal appointment. He stepped outside to take it, and when he came back, his face was completely white. "She's in jail," he said quietly. "And apparently, she's been stealing from charities for years." Dr. Williams, my obstetrician, looked concerned. "Is everything all right? Your blood pressure just spiked significantly." I tried to stay calm, but the stress of everything was finally catching up with me. "My mother-in-law has been harassing us. For months. She was just arrested." Dr. Williams had been my doctor throughout the entire ordeal, and she was one of the people Patricia had tried to contact with false medical recommendations. "I think you need to consider taking some time off work to rest. This level of stress isn't good for you or the baby." That evening, Detective Martinez came to our apartment to update us on the investigation. What she told us revealed the true scope of Patricia's criminal enterprise. "Mrs. Rivera wasn't just targeting your family," she explained. "We've identified at least 6 other families who were harassed using similar methods over the past 5 years. She had a whole system in place." The detective showed us files containing evidence of Patricia's other victims. A young woman who had dated Marcus's cousin was driven away through fabricated criminal charges. A business partner of Patricia's late husband was destroyed through false tax evasion claims. Even a neighbor who had complained about Patricia's loud parties found himself facing bogus animal cruelty charges. She used her wealth and connections to systematically destroy anyone who crossed her or threatened her control, Detective Martinez continued. The charity fraud was how she funded it all. She would steal donations and use the money to pay bribes, hire private investigators, and create false documents. Marcus sat in stunned silence as he processed this information. His mother hadn't just been a difficult person or an overprotective parent. She had been running a criminal organization designed to maintain her power and eliminate her enemies. "There's more," Detective Martinez said. "We found evidence that she was planning to escalate her attacks on your family significantly. She had been researching ways to have Allison declared mentally incompetent so she could gain custody of your gay baby." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, mentally incompetent?" The detective pulled out another folder. "She had been working with a corrupt psychiatrist to create a fake mental health history for you. The plan was to have you involuntarily committed during your pregnancy so she could petition for emergency custody of the baby when it was born." The folder contained draft legal documents, psychiatric evaluations that had never been conducted, and medication records for treatments I had never received. Patricia had been building a case to have me locked away in a mental institution. She was going to claim that your pregnancy was causing psychotic episodes and that you were a danger to yourself and the unborn child, Detective Martinez explained. She had already found a judge who owed her favors and was willing to sign the commitment. "Papers!" Marcus jumped up from his chair, pacing around our small living room. "How is this possible? How did she get away with this for so long?" "Money and connections," the detective replied simply. "She donated to the right political campaigns, served on the right boards, and made friends with the right people. When someone has that kind of influence, it's easy for them to abuse the system." But Patricia's network was finally crumbling. The arrest had triggered investigations into all of her associates and accomplices. The corrupt psychiatrist lost his license and was facing criminal charges. The judge who had been willing to sign false commitment papers was under investigation by the Judicial Review Board. The private investigation firm that had created fake employment records was shut down entirely. Over the next few days, more victims came forward. A local news reporter did a series on charity fraud and social manipulation that exposed the full extent of Patricia's crimes. The story went viral, and soon national news outlets were covering the case. Marcus struggled to process the revelation that his mother was essentially a criminal mastermind who had been destroying lives for years. He had grown up believing she was just a strong-willed woman who wanted the best for her family. Learning that she was actually a sociopathic manipulator who used her wealth to hurt innocent people shattered his understanding of his own childhood and family history. "I keep thinking about all the people who suddenly disappeared from our lives over the years," he told me one evening. "Friends who stopped calling, relatives who moved away without explanation, business associates who just vanished. How many of them were driven away by her?" I was dealing with my own emotional trauma. Knowing that Patricia had been planning to have me committed to a mental institution was terrifying on a level I couldn't fully process. Even though she was in jail, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid that her plans were still in motion somehow. Dr. Williams recommended I see a therapist who specialized in harassment and stalking cases. During my first session with Dr. Rebecca Chen, I broke down completely. "I feel like I can't trust reality anymore," I sobbed. "She created so many fake documents and false stories about me that I sometimes wonder if I'm the crazy one." Dr. Chen nodded understandingly. "What you experienced is called gaslighting on a massive scale. When someone systematically undermines your sense of reality, it can make you question your own memories and perceptions. That's a normal response to psychological abuse." The therapy sessions helped me understand that Patricia's attacks on me weren't personal, even though they felt deeply personal. She would have targeted anyone who threatened her control over Marcus. I was just the latest in a long line of victims who had been destroyed for getting too close to someone she considered her property. Meanwhile, the legal case against Patricia was building momentum. Prosecutors from the Arizona Attorney General's office took over the case because of its complexity and the high-profile nature of the defendants. They were treating it as a major organized crime prosecution. Marcus's law firm offered him a promotion and a raise, partly as an apology for doubting him during the false accusations, but mostly because the publicity from the case had actually enhanced the firm's reputation for integrity. Clients were impressed that Marcus had stood up to corruption, even when it came from his own family. 3 weeks before my due date, we received news that would change everything again. Patricia had been offered a plea deal by the prosecutors, but she had rejected it. Instead, she was planning to represent herself at trial and had subpoenaed both Marcus and me to testify. She wants to cross-examine us personally, Marcus's lawyer explained during a meeting at his office. She's claiming that we orchestrated this entire case to frame her for crimes she didn't commit. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even faced with overwhelming evidence of her guilt, Patricia was still trying to manipulate the situation and paint herself as the victim. Can she do that? Can she force us to testify when I'm about to give birth? Unfortunately, yes. The court can require your testimony unless you have a medical emergency. But there are protections we can put in place to limit her ability to harass you during cross-examination. The thought of facing Patricia in a courtroom, with her questioning me directly about my pregnancy and our marriage, made me physically ill. But I knew this was the price we had to pay for justice. Dr. Williams was concerned about the stress of testifying so close to my due date. "I want you on modified bed rest until after the trial," she said firmly. "And if you go into labor during the proceedings, we're not waiting for the court's convenience." The trial was scheduled to begin 2 weeks before my due date. Patricia had been denied bail after prosecutors argued she was a flight risk with international connections through her charity work. She would be appearing in court wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of her usual designer clothes. Marcus was nervous about seeing his mother again after everything that had been revealed about her criminal activities. "I don't know how to face her," he admitted. "Part of me still remembers the woman who raised me, but that person might never have existed. The night before the trial began, I had a contraction that sent us rushing to the hospital. It turned out to be false labor, but Dr. Williams decided to keep me overnight for observation. Your body is responding to the stress," she explained. "We need to be very careful that you don't go into premature labor because of this trial." As I lay in the hospital bed, feeling my baby moving inside me, I thought about how different my life had become since that wedding day when Patricia first revealed her true nature. What should have been the happiest time of my life, getting married and expecting my first child, had been turned into a nightmare of legal battles and criminal investigations. But I also felt a strange sense of peace. Patricia was finally being held accountable for her actions. Her network of corruption was being dismantled. And most importantly, Marcus and I had survived her attempts to destroy us. The next morning, as we drove to the courthouse for the first day of testimony, I felt my baby kick strongly, as if reminding me that new life was coming despite all the darkness we had endured. What I didn't know was that Patricia had been planning one final surprise for us from her jail cell. And this one would force me to make a choice between justice and my child's safety. The Maricopa County Courthouse was packed with reporters and curious onlookers on the first day of Patricia Rivera's trial. The case had become a media sensation. The wealthy socialite who ran a criminal conspiracy from her country club had captured the public's imagination. I sat in the witness gallery, 38 weeks pregnant and feeling every ounce of it, watching as Patricia entered the courtroom, in shackles. She had lost weight during her time in jail, and her usually perfect hair and makeup were replaced by the harsh reality of orange cotton and fluorescent lighting. But her eyes were the same, cold, calculating, and filled with hatred when they fixed on me. Judge Catherine Morrison, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, called the court to order. The prosecution's opening statement was delivered by Assistant Attorney General David Park, who methodically laid out the evidence of Patricia's crimes. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, over the next several days you will hear testimony about a criminal enterprise that operated for over 5 years. An enterprise run by a woman who used her wealth and social connections to destroy innocent families, steal from charities, and corrupt our legal system itself. He walked the jury through the timeline of Patricia's crimes, from her early harassment, campaigns against Marcus's previous girlfriends to the sophisticated fraud network she had built to attack our family. The evidence was overwhelming. Thousands of documents, recorded conversations, and testimony from dozens of victims and accomplices. When it was time for Patricia's opening statement, she stood up slowly and smoothed her orange jumpsuit like it was a designer dress. She had refused all offers of legal representation, insisting she could defend herself better than any attorney. "Members of the jury," she began in the same cultured voice I remembered from our first meeting, "you are about to witness the greatest injustice in Arizona legal history. Everything you've heard from the prosecution is a lie, fabricated by a manipulative young woman and her weak-willed husband to steal my family's wealth and destroy my reputation." She pointed directly at me, and I felt my baby kick violently in response to my spike in adrenaline. That woman sitting there orchestrated this entire conspiracy. She recorded private conversations illegally, fabricated evidence, and convinced my own son to betray his mother. All because I saw through her, schemed to trap him into marriage. The judge immediately intervened. "Mrs. Rivera, you will direct your comments to the jury, not to the witnesses. And you will confine yourself to facts, not accusations." But Patricia wasn't finished. "Your Honor, I intend to prove that every piece of evidence against me was planted or fabricated. I will show this jury that I am the real victim here and that my son and his wife are the true criminals in this case." The first week of testimony was devastating to Patricia's defense. Witness after witness took the stand to describe how she had systematically destroyed their lives. The corrupt psychiatrist testified about how she had paid him to create false mental health records. The accountant who had helped launder charity money broke down crying as he described the pressure Patricia had put on him to participate in her schemes. Marcus testified on the 4th day, and I could see how difficult it was for him to speak against his own mother. But he told the truth about her behavior, her threats, and her attempts to manipulate him into leaving me. When Patricia cross-examined him, she tried to play the role of the heartbroken mother whose son had been turned against her. "Marcus, do you remember when you were 7 years old and you broke your arm falling off your bicycle?" "Yes, Mom. And do you remember how I stayed up all night in the hospital with you, holding your hand while you cried?" The prosecutor objected, but Patricia continued. "Do you remember all the sacrifices I made for you? The private schools, the college tuition, the help getting your first job?" Marcus's voice was steady but painful. "I remember all of that. I also remember you trying to have my wife committed to a mental institution and planning to steal our baby? Those are lies, Marcus. Lies she convinced you to believe. I heard your own voice on the recordings, Mom. I saw the documents you created. I know what you did." Patricia's facade cracked for just a moment, and I saw pure rage flash across her face before she composed herself again. On Friday of the first week, it was my turn to testify. Dr. Williams had cleared me for court appearances, but insisted on having a nurse practitioner present in case I went into labor. As I was sworn in, I could feel Patricia's eyes boring into me like lasers. The prosecutor took me through my story chronologically, from our first meeting at the country club lunch through the wedding disaster and all of Patricia's subsequent crimes. I spoke clearly and calmly, focusing on facts rather than emotions. When Patricia stood up to cross-examine me, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. She approached the witness stand like a predator stalking prey. "Mrs. Rivera," she began, deliberately using my married name with obvious distaste. "Isn't it true that you planned from the very beginning to marry my son for his money?" "No, that's not true." "Isn't it true that you deliberately got pregnant? To force him into marriage?" "No, we were trying to have a baby together." "But you admit you recorded our private conversations without permission?" "I recorded conversations to protect myself from your harassment." Patricia smiled coldly. "So you admit to illegal wiretapping?" "Thank you." The prosecutor objected, and Judge Morrison sustained it, but Patricia had made her point to the jury. She continued this strategy, trying to paint me as a criminal who had violated her privacy and manipulated her son. "Tell me, Mrs. Rivera, how much money did you expect to inherit when you married Marcus?" "I wasn't thinking about inheritance. I was thinking about love." "But you knew about the family trust fund, didn't you?" "I knew Marcus came from a wealthy family, yes. And you knew that if anything happened to me, you and your child would benefit financially?" The prosecutor's objection was sustained, but Patricia had planted seeds of doubt about my motives. During recess, I started having contractions. They were mild but regular, and Dr. Williams insisted on examining me in the courthouse medical room. "You're starting early labor," she said with concern. "We need to get you to the hospital." But the judge had made it clear that my testimony needed to be completed that day. Going to the hospital would delay the trial by weeks and give Patricia more time to manipulate the proceedings from jail. "Can you give me something to stop the contractions?" I asked. "Just for a few more hours?" Dr. Williams was reluctant, but she agreed to administer medication that would slow my labor temporarily. "This is against my better judgment, but I understand how important this is. However, if your contractions get stronger or if your water breaks, we're leaving immediately." I returned to the witness stand, trying to hide my discomfort as Patricia continued her cross-examination. She seemed to sense that something was wrong and pressed harder, clearly hoping to provoke me into an emotional outburst that would support her claims about my instability. "Isn't it true that you've been taking psychiatric medications during your pregnancy?" "No, I have not. But there are medical records showing prescriptions for antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications." "Those records are forgeries that you created. Can you prove they're forgeries?" "The prosecution has already established they're fake through forensic analysis." Patricia pulled out a folder and approached the bench. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit additional medical evidence that wasn't available to the prosecution." Judge Morrison examined the documents with a frown. "Where did these come from, Mrs. Rivera?" "They were provided to me by a concerned medical professional who wishes to remain anonymous." The prosecutor jumped up. "Objection! This is clearly another fabrication." But Patricia had succeeded in creating confusion and doubt. As the judge reviewed the new documents, I felt another strong contraction and gripped the arms of my chair. Marcus, sitting in the gallery, noticed my distress and started to stand up. That's when Patricia played her final card. "Your Honor, I move for an immediate medical evaluation of the witness. Based on these new documents, I believe she may be suffering from pregnancy-induced psychosis and may not be competent to testify." The courtroom erupted in chaos. The prosecutor was shouting objections, Marcus was trying to get to me, and Patricia was calmly standing at her table with that same cold smile I remembered from our first meeting. But then something unexpected happened. Dr. Williams, who had been observing from the gallery, stood up and spoke directly to the judge. "Your Honor, I am Mrs. Rivera's obstetrician, and I can attest that she is completely mentally competent. Furthermore, the documents Mrs. Rivera is presenting are medically impossible. They describe test results that contradict basic human physiology." Judge Morrison examined the papers more closely. "Dr. Williams, Are you saying these are fraudulent? More than fraudulent, Your Honor. They're medically nonsensical. No legitimate physician would have written these reports. The judge's face darkened as she realized what had happened. Patricia had tried to introduce forged evidence in open court, in front of dozens of witnesses and news cameras. Mrs. Rivera approached the bench immediately. As Patricia walked toward the judge, I felt my water break. The medication Dr. Williams had given me was wearing off, and my labor was progressing rapidly. Dr. Williams, I called out, and she immediately came to the witness stand. We need to get you to the hospital now, she said urgently. Judge Morrison overheard and made a decision that would end Patricia's trial in the most dramatic way possible. This court is adjourned. Mrs. Rivera, you are charged with additional counts of contempt of court and attempted fraud. Bailiff, please escort her back to her cell, and someone call an ambulance for Mrs. Rivera, the witness. As I was being wheeled out of the courthouse on a stretcher, I could hear Patricia screaming at the departing jury. This is all an act. She's faking labor to avoid my questions. Don't let her manipulate you like she manipulated my son. But her words fell on deaf ears. The jury had seen her attempt to introduce forged medical records in real time. They had witnessed her complete lack of empathy as a pregnant woman went into labor on the witness stand. Most importantly, they had seen her true character, not the grieving mother she claimed to be, but the cold, calculating criminal who would do anything to avoid accountability for her crimes. 6 hours later, Marcus and I welcomed our daughter into the world. Emma Rose Rivera was born healthy and perfect, completely unaware of the drama that had surrounded her arrival. The next morning, still recovering in the hospital, we received a call from the prosecutor. The jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours after Patricia's courtroom meltdown. Guilty on all counts, he told us. The judge is talking about the maximum sentence, possibly 25 years to life under the habitual criminal statutes. But Patricia Rivera had one last surprise waiting for us, and this one would test whether justice truly prevails over wealth and connections. 3 days after Emma was born, while I was still recovering in the hospital, Patricia's appeals attorney filed an emergency motion claiming judicial misconduct. The attorney, Richard Blackwood, was one of the most expensive defense lawyers in Arizona, known for getting wealthy criminals reduced sentences through legal technicalities. Marcus was holding our daughter when his phone rang with the news. They're arguing that the judge should have declared a mistrial when you went into labor, he explained after hanging up. They're saying your medical emergency prejudiced the jury against Patricia. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even from her jail cell, Patricia was still trying to manipulate the system and avoid accountability for her crimes. Can they actually overturn the conviction? Blackwood is good at finding loopholes, Marcus admitted. But this argument is pretty weak. The jury convicted her based on evidence, not sympathy. What we didn't know was that Patricia's desperation had led her to make a deal with people far more dangerous than corrupt psychiatrists and bribed accountants. While we were focused on her legal appeals, she was reaching out to contacts from her international charity work, contacts who operated outside the boundaries of law. The first sign of trouble came when Detective Martinez visited us at the hospital with 2 FBI agents. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh and Agent Michael Torres introduced themselves and explained that Patricia's case had attracted federal attention. We've been investigating Mrs. Rivera's charity fraud for several months, Agent Walsh explained. What we've discovered goes far beyond what was presented at her trial. She's been laundering money for several international criminal organizations. Agent Torres pulled out a thick folder. Some of the charities she was stealing from were fronts for money laundering operations. She was taking legitimate donations and mixing them with proceeds from drug trafficking, human trafficking, and arms dealing. Marcus went pale. Are you saying my mother was involved with organized crime? We're saying she became involved with very dangerous people who don't like losing their money. And now that she's been convicted, they're concerned about what she might reveal to reduce her sentence. The agents explained that Patricia had been secretly negotiating with federal prosecutors, offering to provide information about the criminal organizations in exchange for witness protection and a reduced sentence. But the criminals had found out about these negotiations. "We have credible intelligence that there's a contract on Mrs. Rivera's life," Agent Walsh said. "Someone wants her silenced permanently before she can testify." I felt sick to my stomach. Despite everything Patricia had done to us, the thought of her being murdered in prison was horrifying. But there was more bad news coming. "The same intelligence suggests that you and your family might also be targets," Agent Torres continued. "If these criminals believe you have information that could implicate them, they might try to eliminate you as well." The agents wanted to move us into protective custody immediately. Within hours, we were relocated from the hospital to a safe house in a suburb outside Phoenix, with round-the-clock federal protection. Our new home was a modest ranch house with bulletproof windows and multiple escape routes. Federal marshals were stationed outside, and we were forbidden from contacting anyone without supervision. Emma was only 5 days old, and instead of enjoying our first week as new parents, we were living like prisoners. Marcus struggled with the reality that his mother's crimes had put our newborn daughter in danger. "I should have seen the signs years ago. I should have stopped her before it got this far." "You couldn't have known," I tried to reassure him. "She hid her true nature from everyone, including you." But privately, I was terrified. Patricia's hatred for me had already destroyed our wedding, nearly cost Marcus his career, and subjected us to months of legal harassment. Now it might get us killed. The federal agents briefed us daily on the investigation's progress. Patricia was being held in solitary confinement for her own protection, but prison officials had already discovered 2 attempts to smuggle weapons into her cell block. "She's scared," Agent Walsh reported. "She's finally realizing that the people she was dealing with don't operate by the same rules as Phoenix society. Money and connections don't protect you from international criminals." Meanwhile, Blackwood's appeals were making progress through the court system. He had found a sympathetic appeals court judge who agreed to review the conviction on grounds of procedural irregularities. "It's all technical nonsense," the prosecutor David Park explained during one of our briefings. "But Blackwood is very good at creating doubt where none should exist." The appeals process dragged on for weeks. Every day we remained in protective custody, Emma grew bigger and more aware of her surroundings. Instead of decorating a nursery, we were living in a safe house with armed guards. Instead of introducing our daughter to family and friends, we were isolated from everyone we loved. Then we received news that changed everything. Patricia had suffered what appeared to be a heart attack in her jail cell. She was rushed to Phoenix General Hospital under heavy guard, where doctors stabilized her condition but declared it serious. "She's asking to see Marcus," Agent Torres informed us. "She claims she has information that could end the threats against your family." Marcus was torn. Part of him wanted to refuse. After everything his mother had done, he felt she deserved to face the consequences alone. But another part of him, the son who remembered the woman who had raised him, couldn't ignore her request. "What if this is another manipulation?" I asked. "What if she's faking the heart attack to get sympathy or create another legal delay?" "The doctors say it's real," Agent Walsh replied. "Her heart rhythm is severely irregular, and her blood pressure is dangerously high. She's genuinely dying." The decision to visit Patricia in the hospital was one of the hardest Marcus had ever made. Federal agents accompanied him, and he wore a wire to record any confession she might make. I stayed at the safe house with Emma, watching the news coverage of Patricia's hospitalization. The media had turned Patricia into a celebrity criminal. Her story was featured on true crime podcasts and television documentaries. The phrase "country club conspiracy" had become shorthand for wealthy people who abuse their privilege to hurt others. Marcus returned from the hospital 3 hours later, looking emotionally drained. Patricia's confession, recorded by federal agents, revealed the full scope of her criminal empire and her connections to international crime syndicates. She wasn't just laundering money, Marcus explained as we sat in our temporary living room. She was helping organize the entire operation. The charities were her idea, a way to move large amounts of cash without attracting attention. Patricia had admitted to facilitating money laundering worth over $50 million over 5 years. She had used her social connections to recruit wealthy donors who unknowingly contributed to criminal enterprises, believing they were supporting legitimate causes. But here's the worst part, Marcus continued. She says the threats against us aren't just about keeping her quiet. The criminals she was working with invested some of their laundered money in legitimate businesses, including properties and companies that would become part of Emma's inheritance. The implications were staggering. Our daughter was potentially the legal heir to assets purchased with proceeds from drug trafficking and human trafficking. The criminals wanted to eliminate our family to prevent any future legal claims on those assets. Agent Walsh arrived that evening with an update on Patricia's condition and a new development in the case. She's agreed to full cooperation with federal authorities. In exchange, she'll be placed in federal witness protection after serving a reduced sentence. But the cooperation came with strings attached. Patricia insisted on seeing Emma before entering witness protection, claiming she wanted to say goodbye to her granddaughter in case she didn't survive her medical issues. Absolutely not, was my immediate response. She's not getting anywhere near my daughter. Marcus agreed, but the federal agents explained that Patricia's cooperation was crucial to dismantling the entire criminal network. Her testimony could result in dozens of arrests and the seizure of hundreds of millions in criminal assets. We understand your concerns, Agent Torres said, but she might have information that could end the threats against your family permanently. If we can arrest the people who want you dead, you won't need protective custody anymore. The meeting with Patricia was arranged for the following day at the hospital, under heavy security. She was handcuffed to her hospital bed, surrounded by federal agents, and monitored by both video and audio recording equipment. When we entered her room, I was shocked by her appearance. The woman who had terrorized me for months looked frail and defeated. Her perfectly styled hair was now gray and unkempt, and her skin had a sallow, unhealthy pallor. She looked at Emma with an expression I had never seen before, genuine sorrow and regret. For a moment, she seemed like a normal grandmother meeting her granddaughter for the first time. "She's beautiful," Patricia whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "She looks like Marcus did when he was born." But then she looked at me, and I saw a flash of the old hatred. "I still believe you manipulated my son, but I was wrong to involve innocent people in my attempts to prove it." Agent Walsh stepped forward. "Mrs. Rivera, you agreed to provide information about the criminal organizations. We need those names and locations." Patricia reached into her hospital gown and pulled out a small piece of paper she had somehow hidden from the guards. On it were written names, addresses, and bank account numbers. "These are the people who want your family dead," she said, handing the paper to Agent Walsh. "And these are the assets they're trying to protect. If you seize those accounts, they'll have bigger problems than worrying about witnesses." The information Patricia provided led to coordinated raids across 3 states within 24 hours. Federal agents arrested 15 people and seized over $200 million in criminal assets. The threat against our family was neutralized overnight. But Patricia's final revelation would shake our understanding of everything that had happened to us. "The recordings you made of me," she said, looking directly at me. "Someone else was listening to those conversations. Someone who encouraged me to escalate my attacks on you because they wanted Marcus's inheritance for themselves." As Patricia explained who had been manipulating her from behind the scenes, I realized that our ordeal wasn't over. The real enemy had been hiding in plain sight all along, using Patricia's hatred as a weapon while planning to eliminate our entire family. "Richard Blackwood wasn't just my appeals attorney," Patricia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He approached me months before your wedding, suggesting ways to gather evidence of your supposed manipulation. He provided the contacts for creating fake documents and introduced me to the people who could help discredit you. Agent Walsh leaned forward, his expression intense. You're saying your lawyer orchestrated this entire conspiracy? Patricia nodded, weakly. He said he was protecting Marcus from a gold digger, but I realize now he had other motives. Richard has been Marcus's trust fund administrator since my husband died. If something happened to Marcus, or if he was declared unfit, Richard would have continued managing the estate indefinitely. The pieces suddenly clicked together in my mind. Blackwood hadn't just been Patricia's defense attorney. He had been the puppet master pulling her strings from the beginning, using her maternal protectiveness and social prejudices as weapons to eliminate Marcus and me. Marcus stared at his mother in shock. You're saying Uncle Richard wanted me dead? Not dead necessarily, Patricia replied. Discredited, divorced, maybe declared mentally incompetent like we planned for Allison. As long as you couldn't manage your inheritance yourself, he would remain in control of millions of dollars in trust assets. Agent Torres was already on his phone, coordinating with federal prosecutors. The revelation that Blackwood had orchestrated the conspiracy transformed the entire case from family drama into organized financial fraud with multiple victims. There's more, Patricia continued, her voice growing weaker. Richard has been skimming money from the trust for years. He used my charity connections to launder stolen funds, making it look like legitimate donations and investments. When you got married, Allison, he realized he might lose control if you started asking questions about family finances. The hospital room erupted into controlled chaos as federal agents began coordinating an immediate investigation into Blackwood's activities. But I was focused on Patricia, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time without the filter of hatred or fear. She wasn't the criminal mastermind I had believed her to be. She was a grieving widow who had been manipulated by someone she trusted. Someone who had exploited her love for her son to serve his own greed. That didn't excuse the terrible things she had done to me and Marcus, but it explained how a protective mother had become a dangerous criminal. Mrs. Rivera, Agent Walsh said, we need you to help us build a case against Blackwood. Are you willing to testify about his role in this conspiracy? Patricia looked at Marcus and me, then at Emma sleeping in her carrier. I've already lost my son and destroyed my family. The least I can do is make sure the man responsible pays for what he's done. Over the next 48 hours, the federal investigation into Richard Blackwood revealed the stunning scope of his criminal enterprise. He had been embezzling from multiple trust funds and estates, using Patricia's charity network to launder over $100 million over 8 years. Marcus was devastated to learn that someone he had trusted as family had been systematically stealing his inheritance while orchestrating attacks on his wife and newborn daughter. He was at our wedding, Marcus said, as we reviewed the evidence in our safe house. He gave a toast about family loyalty and protecting the ones we love, all while planning to destroy us. The federal agents discovered that Blackwood had contingency plans in place depending on how his manipulation of Patricia played out. If she had succeeded in breaking up our marriage, he would have offered to help Marcus through the difficult divorce while maintaining control of his assets. If we had been killed by the international criminals, he would have positioned himself as Emma's guardian and trustee. He played every angle, Agent Walsh explained. No matter what happened to your family, he was positioned to benefit financially. The raid on Blackwood's law offices uncovered a sophisticated operation involving forged documents, bribed officials, and connections to multiple criminal organizations. His client list read like a who's who of wealthy criminals seeking to legitimize their assets through legal channels. But Blackwood had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated Patricia's capacity for guilt and redemption. Her decision to confess and cooperate gave federal prosecutors everything they needed to dismantle his entire operation. 3 days later, Richard Blackwood was arrested at his Scottsdale mansion while attempting to flee to a country without extradition. Treaties. Federal agents found suitcases filled with cash and fake passports in multiple names. The news of his arrest made national headlines. The wealthy attorney who had built a career defending high-profile criminals was revealed to be a criminal himself, using his position to orchestrate elaborate fraud schemes against his own clients' families. Marcus and I watched the news coverage from our safe house, holding Emma and trying to process everything that had happened to us. The man who had been a family friend for years, who had helped settle Marcus's father's estate and had been trusted with our financial future, had been systematically destroying us from behind the scenes. How did we not see it? Marcus asked, watching Blackwood's perp walk on television. How did he fool us for so long? The same way he fooled your mother, I replied. He told her what she wanted to hear and gave her targets for her anger. He made her believe she was protecting you while he was actually trying to destroy you. A week later, we were finally able to leave protective custody and return to our normal lives. Patricia had been transferred to a federal medical facility, where she would serve a reduced sentence in exchange for her cooperation. The appeals of her original conviction had been withdrawn as part of her plea agreement. Marcus's trust fund assets were recovered and secured under new management. The money that had been laundered through Patricia's charities was traced and returned to legitimate organizations. The international criminals who had threatened our family were either arrested or fled to countries where they couldn't reach us. But the emotional healing would take much longer than the legal resolution. Marcus struggled with guilt over not seeing through Blackwood's manipulation earlier. I should have protected you from all of this, he said as we set up Emma's nursery in our own home for the first time. We protected each other, I replied. And we protected her. That's what matters. Our marriage had been tested in ways I never could have imagined. We had faced criminal harassment, legal fraud, international death threats, and the revelation that someone we trusted was trying to destroy us. But we had survived it all together. 6 months later, Patricia called from federal prison. She had been allowed one supervised phone call to check on Emma's health and development. The conversation was awkward and painful, but it represented the first step toward possible reconciliation someday in the future. She's beautiful in the photos Marcus sent, Patricia said, her voice fragile over the prison phone system. I know I can never undo the harm I caused, but I want you to know that seeing her changed something in me. It made me remember what family is supposed to be about. I didn't forgive her. The wounds were still too fresh and deep, but I no longer hated her either. She had been as much a victim of Blackwood's manipulation as we were, even if she had chosen to act on the hatred and fear he had cultivated in her. Marcus began attending therapy to process the complex emotions of having his mother and trusted family friend betray him so completely. I continued my own counseling to deal with the trauma of being systematically attacked and threatened. Emma grew into a happy, healthy baby who was surrounded by love from the family members and friends who had supported us through the crisis. My parents, Marcus's extended family who had witnessed Patricia's meltdown at our wedding, and friends like Jessica who had stood by us throughout the ordeal. A year after our wedding day disaster, Marcus and I decided to renew our vows in a private ceremony with just our closest family and friends. This time, there were no hidden agendas, no secret recordings, and no threats from dangerous criminals. As we exchanged rings again in the same garden where our original ceremony had been destroyed, I thought about how much we had endured and overcome. We had learned that love isn't just about the happy moments, it's about standing together when everything falls apart. Emma gurgled happily in Jessica's arms as we kissed to seal our renewed commitment. She would grow up knowing that her parents had fought for their family and won, not through revenge or manipulation, but through truth, courage, and unwavering loyalty to each other. The media eventually moved on to other scandals, and the country club conspiracy became just another true crime story in the archives. But for us, it remained the crucible that had forged our marriage into something stronger than either of us had thought possible. Richard Blackwood was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Patricia was released to a halfway house after serving 3 years, under the condition that she have no contact with our family until Emma turned 18. The international criminals were either imprisoned or eliminated by their own organizations, as loose ends. Today, Emma is 5 years old and asks why she only has one grandparent who visits us. Marcus and I have decided to tell her the truth when she's old enough to understand that sometimes people make terrible choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love, but that doesn't mean love itself is dangerous. Our story began with hatred disguised as protection and ended with genuine protection disguised as justice. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. But sometimes, fighting back against that hurt reveals who truly deserves your trust and devotion. Marcus and I built our marriage on a foundation of truth, even when that truth was painful to face. We learned that real love doesn't require perfection. It requires honesty, courage, and the willingness to stand together against whatever threatens to tear you apart. And that's a lesson worth more than any inheritance. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.